Hello everyone and welcome to Cappuccino with HR. My name is Rudi Bauer and after 40 years in business I'm 100% sure that the success of companies is directly related to the passion of the people working for these companies. With the Cappuccino of HR we created a format where we really invite people, it's HR leaders, it's recruiters, it's talent acquisition guys, and we're talking about all the different kind of topics, and the range is going from AI of course to new work, to leadership, and all the challenges along the way. Yeah, hello and welcome to another episode of Cappuccino with HR. And today I have a really great guest. I met him the first time in Amsterdam at a conference where he was talking about the topic we are talking about today as well, Ash Jones. I mean, Ash, it's really a pleasure to have you in my show because I was so impressed by your talk, and I think the topic of personal branding is a really hot one at the moment. So really welcome. Thank you for taking your time.
No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you today.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I think it was the World Employer Branding Day in Amsterdam, where you did a really great talk. I was listening to it, and it was, I think the title was "When Leaders Speak, Brands Grow." I think that was the title, and even the title was so inspiring and created a lot of curiosity in my mind. So I was really carefully listening, and we're talking about this today because I think there's a hell of a lot of going on in employer branding. Companies try to present them as good as possible. They really get the kind to try to get a shiny, glimmery image on themselves as companies. But at the end of the day, I think probably I'm not right, but we can talk about it from now. I think we're working for people, we're working with people, we want to follow people. And at the end of the day, it's always a kind of what do humans do? What is your take and what brought you to that? But before we start, I want really to ask you to introduce yourself in a few sentences for the audience.
Okay, so I'm Ash Jones. I'm the founder of a personal branding agency called Great Influence, and I've been doing personal branding for about a decade now. And my career started out with working with Steven Bartlett, who has a podcast called The Diary of a CEO. And he's on Dragon's Den in the UK, which is like the UK version of Shark Tank. And that's how I got started in personal branding, working with him and learning the ropes there. And then I set up my own agency, helping other founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and senior leaders to figure out a kind of like personal branding, how they show up on social media, how they create content. So yeah, that's a few short sentences about me.
Mm-hmm. And the second thing that I have to ask all my guests, as it's called Cappuccino with HR, is Ash, what's your favorite coffee? Are you drinking coffee, and what's your favorite one?
Yes, I'm a flat white guy.
Okay.
This year I threatened to switch to Americano, but yeah, I don't know. I've just kind of stuck with flat whites. So yeah, that's my drink of choice.
Okay, good. Really cool. And if we come to personal branding, I mean, what I mentioned is what brought you into that business? Why do you think, or what was the reason for you that made you start thinking about building your own company and taking it serious and necessary? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, like I say, I started out working with Steven Bartlett on his personal brand, and how that actually came about is quite interesting in that I was part of the founding team at the business that he built that kind of propelled him into the spotlight. And I was the marketing director at that business, which was a social media agency. Okay. And nobody in the team came from an agency background. So we didn't have any recognition in the industry. Like nobody knew who we were. And we were trying to essentially just get our name out there as an agency and try to get a bit of a voice in the market, so to speak, and try to win clients. And the best way, this was in 2015 when the agency started, and the best way that we did that in the first year was Steve going and speaking at events, which if you're, I guess, in any kind of industry, speaking at events is usually quite like a good thing to do from a marketing perspective or new business. But especially if you're in the agency business and you're in like service businesses, the chance for you to get on stage in front of an audience that's relevant to what you do as an agency and to try to sell your thinking and sell your ideas and therefore sell your agency as a potential solution for clients and buyers is usually a good way of kind of generating new business. So we did that in the first year and it really, really worked. Like out of everything that we tried from a marketing standpoint as an agency to just try to get our name out there when nobody knew who we were, that was the thing that worked by far the best for us. So in the second year, we kind of sat down and thought, right, okay, Steve speaking on stage is really working for us. How do we scale that further? How do we scale the impact of him speaking as our CEO and founder? And that's when we kind of decided like, right, okay, let's take what we're doing in the speaking arena and take it online onto social media and started creating video content. And it very much started out as a bit of a side project at first. And then it very quickly started to gain traction and we could see how beneficial it was for the agency in terms of generating new business, hiring people, even raising investment and getting in front of potential investors. Him having a personal brand was really helping us drive so much for the agency business that it then changed from being a bit of a side project to something that I was working on full time, and we started to build a team around. So it all came from the idea of like, we're running a business. How do we achieve some of the strategic objectives and goals of that business best? And one of the answers was for our founder and CEO to build his personal brand. And I think that we were probably quite early to doing that. 2015, but we were a social media agency and we knew how social media worked. That was our speciality. So it made sense for us to do it for ourselves in some way, shape or form. And yeah, that's kind of how it started, and how my outlook on personal brand has always been, is that it's a business tactic that helps drive strategic business objectives through an individual as a marketing channel. And I think that personal branding has definitely evolved in the last decade, where now having a personal brand as somebody in business, whether an entrepreneur or just at any stage of your career, you can now do that full time. And you can become a content creator within business and entrepreneurship, and you can get paid for it and turn it into a career. But for me, it's always been about, and what I do now and have done for the past 10 years is about helping businesses to leverage people within the business to have more voice within the industry to help drive certain objectives and opportunity creation for the business and the brand.
Logical next question from our side. How difficult was it to convince Steven in the beginning?
He said no at first. There's a clip of him on one of the episodes of the podcast, The Diary of a CEO, where he's talking about that decision to create content for the first time. And he actually, I think we maybe had, it was a bit of an ongoing conversation over a couple of years, and there wasn't really a purpose for him to do it until the agency business started. And then it was like, right, okay, I can do this because it can drive the agency business forward. But yeah, he was hesitant to do it at first because, in his own words, he thought that people would look at what he was doing and think that he was excuse my language, a dickhead. That's what he said. He thought like people would think, who do you think you are, like making these videos and sharing your opinion and, you know, putting your voice out there. And I think that's a very, very, very common maybe challenge or problem people have with doing it in the early stages, is like people worried about how they're going to be judged and perceived as a result of doing this kind of thing. So yeah, but he was, I feel like he was always going to do it at some point, and everything that he's doing now, you could kind of see that he had a talent for it in some way, shape or form in those early days. So yeah, he was, I feel like with this kind of thing, you've just got to kind of dip your toes in the water and commit to going through those early stages where it's a bit uncomfortable, you're a bit uncertain about it, you're building up the confidence, maybe you're making mistakes, maybe you look back at things and think, oh, that's not great what I've done, but I'm learning. And he was like the prime example of somebody willing to do those things and go on that journey.
I mean, I was watching your posts on LinkedIn, and I found one which, because I think there's always this kind of discussion, probably if you want to bring it into the heads of your managers in an organization, you always have this kind of nice discussions. I think there's two streams of discussion. One is probably what you already mentioned. This is okay. I'm probably too shy or not important enough to go out and raise my voice. That's probably one hindering factor that I see in the discussion. The second one is probably that it's a kind of a nice to have thingy. So we have other things to be solved first. And I found the post where you mentioned Lara from Deloitte. And I would probably ask you to repeat the story a little bit, or I explain the story, the content of the story, because there's a hell of a lot of business value in it. And I think that's probably not seen in the first take from managers and top leaders as well.
Yeah, so the story is that there was a woman called Lara who was working at Deloitte, and I think she just started posting on LinkedIn, and she gained a bit of a good traction there, and it became evident quite quickly, given that what she was talking about, how it could be valuable for Deloitte in terms of them driving leads and having more of an awareness and a voice in the market and all these kind of things. And she essentially had a conversation with her manager at Deloitte, and they agreed that her essentially like creating content and building a social media channel was going to be her full-time job at Deloitte, which was the first time that they'd made somebody a quote unquote corporate influencer. And in the space of 1 year, I think she drove roughly 13,000 leads for Deloitte, and the media value of the content that she was creating on behalf of Deloitte was somewhere in the region of like $2 to $3 million media value for Deloitte. So yeah, I think, and Deloitte have a program internally of corporate influencers who, again, it's their job to build a platform and create content, and naturally Deloitte comes into that because they're working there, and Deloitte are opening up so many opportunities for them. I think they were like eventually sending Lara to speak at events and go to network things and opportunities for her that were Deloitte opened those doors for her. So naturally she's going to be an advocate, an ambassador for Deloitte in turn of those things. So yeah, I think that was a bit of a story where I'm sure that's been happening at a lot of different companies over the last couple of years in some way, shape or form. But it feels like now it's definitely evolving from something that is very much on the bleeding edges of, I guess, innovation and evolution of how employees work for brands and businesses. And I think it's gone like bleeding edges into now being thought about as how can we actually create something internally that starts to bring this into the norm a bit more, rather than it being a disruptive, innovative thing that we're doing internally. It's like, how can we actually make this part of the culture and something that is potentially scalable, that works for both parties in terms of the employees and the business.
I mean, if companies start thinking about building or using this kind of ambassadorship or opinion leaders as their role models out there, is it something which from your point of view needs to be top management first, or could it start somewhere within the organization? Could it be spreaded throughout the organization? Should it be spreaded throughout the organization? Or is it really something which is tied to the CEO or the board members?
Personally, I think it has to come from the top down, because then it becomes culturally acceptable. Whereas I think the issue with a lot of this at the minute is that it's just not within the culture of companies as a normal accepted thing, and there's still a friction where it's perceived to be self-serving. So if there's people who are just in the wider employee base that are doing it, and it's not at the top, then it might be perceived to be of self-interest rather than something that is of benefit to the company. And there might be a bit of a bit of hesitance from the employee to do it because it's going to be perceived in a certain manner. Whereas I think when it comes from the top and it's accepted and kind of championed from the top, it then feels like a more accepted thing for people to do and feel empowered to do across the company. And doing this isn't anything new. I think if you look back for decades, especially in businesses where education was part of sales, so like maybe SaaS platforms and tech platforms, B2B and things like that, there was always people within the company who would be considered evangelists, and it would be their job to go out and to educate the market and be an internal expert that went out and told the market about what the company was doing, and being like thought leadership, evangelist, expertise kind of lead. The difference was that if you think 10 to 15 years ago when that was happening, they wouldn't do it from their own personal channels because social media didn't exist. So they would go and do it on behalf of the company at events or on blogs on the company website or on external industry websites and external media publications and things like this. They would do it on behalf of the company in platforms that were external to them that they didn't own. And then social media comes into the picture, and now you personally have a platform that you can use to do the exact same job. And I think the cultural difference is that there was almost if you were doing it on the company's platform, owned platform, or an external platform, it was never questioned as being self-serving, self-interest. It was just something that you did to help the brand and the business. Whereas now, because the platform is yours and you own it, there's this almost underlying feeling that maybe this is self-serving or of self-interest in some way. I think there's still a bit of a hesitancy because it's your personal platform that you're using to do the thought leadership, the advocacy, being an ambassador and a champion of the company. And I think it's just going to take a bit of a transition period for that to become normal with culture. So yeah, to me, it's something that's been happening within companies for decades, I think now. And I also think that a lot of the time, maybe it happens solely within leadership within companies, whereas now the opportunity is for anyone within a company to have a voice. And I think, again, it's like maybe brands and businesses feel that when it escapes from leadership and goes into the wider company, maybe they lose a little control and they lose a little trust and they lose a little comfortableness with doing it. So yeah, I think if a company kind of their leadership does it, it creates a culture that it's safe for people to do, but there's still, from my point of view, a bit of hesitancy from the brand side of allowing it to happen without them having full control of it and trusting people to be an advocate for the company and be an ambassador in the right way. So yeah, it's definitely like an evolving thing. And you think previously, maybe 10 years ago, just the CEO would have a voice within the company, and that voice would be distributed through company channels, whether offline or online. And that's changing now, where the CEO has a personal channel in the same way that the intern has a personal channel, and they can both use them to be an ambassador for the company in some way, shape or form. So yeah, I feel like we're maybe in the messy middle of all of this. It's going to take a couple of years for businesses and brands to find the right process, to find the right ways of support and resourcing, and to find the right way to bring it into the culture of the company in the right way.
What do you think is important if it comes to the tone of voice? Because I mean, if the CEO, for example, on his personal social media channels is just copy and pasting all the content, I mean, it doesn't make sense. I think it doesn't. How important is it to stay really personally authentic on one hand? And what's the trick to really get out the messages, but not by just copy pasting it from, because then it's business content which is spread it on private channels. I mean, it doesn't make sense neither. So
yeah, I think again we're in like the middle of a transition with this, where previously the CEO would only speak as part of a press release. Some kind of announcement or launch, or there'd be something happening in the company, and the CEO would provide a quote or a statement. And that's the only time that a CEO used to speak externally. It was very controlled. It was, it kind of had to be formal because it was going into publications and media. And now what we're seeing is a transition from the CEO's voice being part of a company press release in some way, shape, or form into them needing to have a more everyday voice on their own channel. So what we're seeing is the press release is coming from their own channel rather than the company channel. That's the shift that in the past couple of years. But it's still, a lot of the time, it feels like a press release. It's still in corporate speak. It doesn't feel like a human speaking to a human. It feels very formalized. And the kind of era of social media that we're in is that people are now very almost, they overlook corporate speak. Like they've got so used to becoming tuned out of corporate speak that they just scroll past it. They don't engage, and companies know this now. So they've took the first step, some of them, of like the CEO is now using their own channel, but it still feels like it's a press release, and they're trying to figure out, right, how do we get the CEO to be much more personal and authentic in their communications? And I think that's maybe the bit that a lot of companies are struggling with. And it's actually like, I've had a couple of conversations with quite like large brands in the past couple of months, and that's a very common thread where they're happy with the fact that the CEO is now more engaged and is maybe using their own personal channels, but they feel from a communications point that it's very non-representative of the actual person that exists offline. So, yeah.
Does it mean that you have to be talented as well, or is it something that everyone can learn?
No, I think it's something that everybody can leverage in some way, shape, or form. It's just what's comfortable to them. And are they willing to try to become a bit more comfortable in understanding how best to show up online as themselves? And that looks different for everyone. For one person, that might look like being able to do podcasting and being very comfortable in that arena. For another person, it might look like just doing written content, and that is it. For one person, it might be sharing and documenting and taking people behind the scenes of the company and going quite deep into what happens. For another, it might be staying very surface level with what's going on. But I think that for me, like now in the modern era, it's a responsibility of leadership to have a voice online. I think if you're not doing it, you're actually being negligent towards the opportunity creation of the company, and your role as a leader within the company. It should be part of that responsibility should be to have at least some kind of presence online and have some kind of voice online in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's just going to become the norm over the next decade. I think we're all seeing it kind of bleeding into job descriptions. And we're seeing it bleeding into roles to support CEOs with this kind of thing. I think I gave an example at the conference in Amsterdam of PayPal, who were hiring a head of CEO content with a $250,000 salary. So it kind of speaks to those roles didn't exist 5 years ago, and now they're starting to exist, which speaks to the shift that's happening within companies.
To another topic, I mean, if it comes to volume, if it comes to noise that we are producing on social media, do you think where's the exact balance of content that should be spread out? Is it like in marketing? I was working in marketing and advertising for many years, and when I was working for Bang& Olufsen, we had the saying, "Less is more."
Yeah.
Is it less is more? Is it more is more? Where is the right balance if it comes to using the channels, producing this kind of content? Do you need to have an answer on every question or an opinion on every single post, or is it just doing the right things right?
Yeah, I think there's two answers to this question. So one is it depends what size company you're in. So if you're in a startup, I think that there's no issue with you posting on social media every single day. Whereas if you're the CEO of a global group brand, then if you're posting every single day, there's people within the company, and especially at board level, that are going to haven't you got a job to do? How are you able to post on social media every day? So I think the higher up you go in terms of the corporate chain, the more that the optics of you using social media have to be considered and come into play, and a less is more is something that you're doing to actually manage the optics of you doing social media internally. So I think that's one part of it. And then the other is that I think that social media, just as in general, culturally, is kind of shifting to a less is more model. And we kind of move from people posting every single day and that being something that you do to please the algorithm, to, especially in the world of business and entrepreneurship and within professional industries and more like corporate and B2B and things like that, it's more about the value of what you're saying than how often you're saying something. And I think that's a bit of a cultural shift that's definitely taken place this year that we're starting to see more and more and more.
And how important is focus? I mean, you can have an answer on everything which is posted on LinkedIn, for example, on other social media channels. How important do you think is staying focused on the topics that are relevant for you as a person on one hand, and for you as a company, or for your company on the other hand?
I think, again, it depends on the business and the individual who's doing this and what the goal is. So part of what could be valuable to the business is that one of the people within the business having a large number of followers. That might, so take, for example, if you're in the entertainment industry and you're running a talent agency in Los Angeles, it's probably very valuable for the CEO to be considered somebody who is of high influence within that industry, and that equates to having a large amount of followers. In the entertainment industry, the vanity metrics matter more than if they would in the B2B industry. Whereas in the B2B industry, you might be operating within a small market of buyers, and it's much more your follower count and how many likes you're getting, and the vanity metrics that exist with social media and content, they don't influence what you're trying to achieve as a business. So you can kind of take the opposite route, where it's much more about what you say and the things that you speak on really landing with the market of buyers and audience that you're trying to engage with. So again, it just depends, like a CEO of a talent agency in Los Angeles versus a CEO of a performance marketing SaaS platform in London would have different objectives when it comes to personal brand, and the approach that they would take would be different in what is considered valuable for the business.
Do you see a conflict that could occur between being professional and being personal sometimes?
Yeah, I think you're always going to be, it's about towing the right line, and there'll be hundreds of thousands of instances in businesses this year where people have potentially failed to toe the line, and it potentially brings the brand into some kind of risk. And I think again that it's a bit of a messy middle that we're in, where nobody knows how to manage and address and converse those situations and conversations, and what the procedures should be, what process should look like, and should there be a process, should there not, should we have a procedure, should we not, should we have guidelines, should we not. There isn't a collective answer to what happens when this goes wrong, and I think that that's the reason why there's still quite a lot of risk attached to it from brands and businesses. But from my point of view, it feels like nobody's willing to define the answers. They're just sitting on the fence of risk. So the risk is going to exist until you find what the answer is, and until you decide as a company how you're going to operate with this kind of thing. I think when it gets left to nobody to define, then it becomes an issue. Whereas if it's very clear how you as a company not want people to operate with social media, because you can't tell people what to do with their own platforms, but at least make some kind of conversation and make it, again, it's like bringing it into the culture of the company, and people know where the lines are and where they stand. I think a lot of people would appreciate that at the very baseline guidance around what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. What are the things that would be considered risk or potential damage to the company versus the other side too. I think this is something that a lot of people don't even think about with this conversation, is that it's an opportunity to you to say, this is how we'd love you to use social media. And this would be something that creates lots of opportunity for us. A lot of people are just thinking about the negative and the risk associated with it when it comes to those conversations. And again, when they do have those conversations, it can feel a bit tense, because you're only discussing the risk and you're only discussing the potential downside and the potential negative, rather than looking at it holistically from the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats, the guidelines, and all that kind of thing.
Um, I mean, if you want to tell a story, if you want to be authentic, I mean, it's a little bit like sitting at a campfire and just talking. I think that's probably the most natural way of telling stories. Like probably people 1,000 years ago already did it. What do you think are the basic ingredients for a well working story? If you have to build it from scratch, or if a customer ask you how to build it, what are the three elements that make it work?
From my experience, I think there has to be there's a lot to be said in like the hero's story, like the classic where the film made and Disney follows and Pixar follows, and the hero's journey and arc kind of thing. Like story, you can learn a lot about storytelling completely outside of business. And it's like how, for me, I'm a massive music fan, so I look how did the Beatles create so much hype around themselves as a band, or the Rolling Stones, or I think one example for me that's really great is like David Bowie, where it's like he reinvented himself as an artist visually and almost played different characters, and he did that to be able to evolve and stay relevant to people. So there's so many different devices in terms of storytelling that you can use. I think in my career history, the businesses that I've been at, the ones that have done it best, have understood a way to kind of promote themselves as the underdog. Also to find something, a narrative that a lot of people can relate to, and also to make it a personal story where possible. So one of the ways that when Steven Bartlett was running Social Chain was the agency, he would do public speaking, and the presentation he would do, it was going to be about Social Chain and social media, and we're an agency that does social media for brands. That would come into the story at some point. But the story always started off of him talking about a phone call that he had with his mother when he decided to drop out of university. And he had this phone call with his mother, and he told her that he was dropping out of university, and she responded, she essentially almost disowned him in that moment. And she was like, don't call me in the family again, kind of thing. And in that moment where Steve is speaking and there's 10 other speakers on that day, and all of them have talked about what they do and the business and the product and the, you know, their knowledge and insight and all this kind of thing, to start with something, to me, it's not about starting with a story or an emotion. It's about starting with something different. It's something that people aren't expecting, that just means that they're listening. And then once you've captured their attention, you can kind of go into what they're expecting to hear. But I think start off with something that they're not expecting to hear, that's designed to grab their attention.
That's really cool. As our community and our listeners are coming from the HR space and HR ecosystem mainly, so what is a tip from your side to convince their CEOs to build a personal brand? What is the most compelling argument from your side that you can make and give them?
I think probably for that kind of audience, it's the cultural impact on the company. So like the company culture and how strengthened it can be, and people's relationship with the company can be defined by a CEO having a presence and being a champion for the company and the culture and the people and the teams and the work that they do. And especially this applies, the larger the company is, the more important it is. Because if you're in a company with 100 people, you're regularly seeing the CEO. Even if you don't have face time with them, you still see them in the building. Whereas if you're in a company of 10,000 people, you may not only have zero interaction with the CEO in a year, but you also might actually see the CEO, apart from maybe once at like a town hall kind of event, company event. So that touch point that the CEO can have, which is like, they talk about it in pop culture of building parasocial relationships, where like podcasters are building parasocial relationships with their audience, where their audience feel like they know the podcaster so much better because they listen to the podcast. Despite having never met the podcaster, they feel like they have a parasocial relationship with them. And you see this again in music with artists. And I think it's that, like, the bigger the size of the company and the less in-person or FaceTime or just touch point that a CEO has with their wider team, the more important them having a presence to lean into that idea of building a parasocial relationship, and them being a champion of the culture and the work and the teams and the people. And you're seeing it more and more now, where there's data coming out where it says that if not just the CEO, but if leadership are positive about the culture of the company and the people and teams within it, the impact that that has on the retention of employees is a lot higher than if it doesn't exist. So I think, again, it's like we're seeing an evolution happening here, and it's a tool that people can use, not to be in like dish genuine, but to use it authentically to help to create more of a retention between employees and the brand and the business, and more of a connection. I think, yeah, that's probably the biggest selling point that I could give in this day and age, especially for larger businesses. There's more of a disconnect than ever between leadership and wider teams, and you can use it to help to bridge that gap in some way, shape, or form in a very time efficient manner, which is especially important when you get into leadership, where they don't have the time to be able to meet everyone in the company or say, touch point with them at some point. You can at least have an online touch point where they get an understanding of what you're doing and what's happening in your world, and they feel like they're plugged into it in some way, shape, or form.
And I think it definitely helps for recruiting as well, because if you're present, and people love to follow people that they're trusting and that are probably authentic. Yeah. Really cool. Ash, I think we have to come to an end. I think we are very close to the end of the session, but I want to play a small game with you. It's called This or That, and I want to throw some topics towards you, and I would ask you to give me a quick answer and pick and choose one of the two two words that I throw towards you. A quick round of that, if okay. So I would like to start with authenticity or strategy.
Strategy, I think.
Okay. Yeah. LinkedIn posts or LinkedIn videos?
LinkedIn videos.
Okay. Thought leader or storyteller?
Thought leader.
Quality or quantity?
Quality.
Okay. And branding is art or branding is science?
Art.
Art. Go wide or go niche is the last one.
Go niche.
Go niche. Really cool. And the last thing before we stop, as we are very close to Christmas, and if Aladdin with his magic lamp would come to you now and he would give you one wish for free, what would it be? It could be personal or probably related to the topic we discussed.
That's a great question. For the business that I run to achieve what we want it to achieve so that the people working within it are happy.
Mm-hmm. Really cool one. Thank you for that one. Ash, thank you very much for your time. It was a real pleasure to have you on Cappuccino with HR. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think the topic is extremely interesting. And my personal wish is that I can convince you to come to Berlin next year to our conference, because I think the audience would love to hear more of your thoughts and experience and stories, because there's so much in it. And I think that's definitely a kind of I think it's a really door opener for getting the talent on board that we need for all the future challenges that we are facing currently. I think we need people that follow people, and we need people that love to follow people and leaders. So I think that's probably one of the tools that we could use. And thank you so much for your time, dear audience. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did during recording. So stay tuned. And Ash, thank you very much and goodbye.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Cappuccino with HR. If you enjoy this kind of conversations, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Then you get all this kind of upfront information, your upcoming episodes, and all my nice guests. Cappuccino with HR is brought to you by We Are Developers, Europe's #1 developer community and a leading platform for connecting HR and companies together with developers. If you want to learn more, visit us on wearedevelopers.com. Thank you again for watching, and see you next time on Cappuccino with HR.